There is a unique, suffocating kind of burning in your chest when the people who are supposed to love and protect you look at you like you are nothing more than a stain on their pristine rugs. It burns even worse when that look happens in the middle of a $4 million coastal estate that, unbeknownst to everyone standing in the room at that very moment, actually belongs to you. I was standing perfectly still in the center of a massive, vaulted-ceiling kitchen imported straight from Italy, wearing a soft green dress I had saved up for months to buy. It was a simple, modest dress, but it made me feel human for the first time in what felt like decades. Now it was utterly ruined. The dark, expensive red wine was dripping down my collar, staining the delicate fabric, turning my one nice piece of clothing into a sticky, humiliating mess that clung to my skin. My sister, Gemma, stood barely 3 feet across from me. She was wearing a custom silk gown that probably cost more than my entire yearly budget for groceries and gas combined. She held her empty wine glass with a delicate, practiced grip, her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of fake pity that she had perfected for her massive online audience. "Oh, Sloane," she sighed, her voice dripping with that manufactured, sugary sweetness she used exclusively to patronize me. "You just do not fit the luxury vibe we are going for here. You are ruining the entire aesthetic of my dinner party. Just go back down to the basement where you belong. Take a trash bag of leftovers if you are hungry." I looked at her. Then I slowly turned my gaze to my parents, Orson and Daphne, who were standing right next to the massive marble island. They did not rush forward to hand me a towel. They did not reprimand their golden child for intentionally throwing a full glass of wine directly at my chest. Instead, my mother Daphne let out an exasperated breath, rolled her eyes, and gestured vaguely toward the servant stairs hidden behind the pantry. "You heard your sister, Sloane," she snapped, her voice tight with annoyance. "The important guests are arriving in less than 20 minutes, and you look like an absolute disaster. Do not ruin this night for our family. Go downstairs." I swallowed the heavy, bitter lump of pure, unadulterated anger in my throat. I wanted to scream until my lungs gave out. I wanted to grab the heavy glass decanter and smash it against the imported marble counter. But I stood completely frozen, letting the cold wine soak through my dress and into my skin. This right here was the defining moment of my incredibly toxic family dynamic. This was the ultimate family drama playing out in real time, a masterclass in psychological abuse. The humiliation was profound, meticulously designed to break my spirit in front of the very people who were supposed to be my safety net. But what Gemma and my parents did not realize was that the damp, dark basement they had banished me to had not broken me at all. The darkness down there had given me clarity. It had taught me exactly how to see through their elaborate, pathetic lies. I turned around without saying a single word and walked toward the heavy wooden door that led downstairs. I had swallowed their insults, accepted their blame, and survived on their literal scraps for 3 long, agonizing years. But tonight was going to be different. Tonight, the grand, sparkling illusion they had built on my back was going to crash down around them in a spectacular fashion. But to truly understand how a simple, traditional Thanksgiving dinner turned into a scene of utter, devastating family revenge, I have to take you back to the cold, damp reality of my everyday life. And the exact reasons why I allowed myself to be treated like a stray dog for so long. The basement was not a finished living space. It was never meant to hold a human being. It was a massive concrete box designed purely for storage and heavy pool machinery. The air down there always smelled faintly of mildew, old cardboard, and wet dust. There were no windows, not even a tiny slit to let in the sunlight. There was just a single, flickering fluorescent bulb hanging precariously from a raw wire in the center of the room. Every single night, I slept on a thin, sunken twin mattress pushed into the darkest corner, listening to the loud, rhythmic, mechanical grinding of the rusted water pump that pushed heated water up to the infinity pool. It was a horrible sound that vibrated right through the concrete and into my bones, making it impossible to ever get a full night of rest. While Gemma lived directly upstairs in a massive master suite the size of a luxury penthouse apartment, surrounded by panoramic floor-to-ceiling views of the ocean, I lived in a sunless, freezing cavern. It was bitterly cold in the winter months and suffocatingly humid during the summer. I am a scenic painter by trade. I build and paint massive, intricate backdrops for community theaters, and I take on heavy commercial mural jobs to make ends meet. It is brutally hard, physically exhausting labor. I spend 10 to 12 hours a day balanced on dangerous scaffolding, my hands permanently stained with industrial primer, my shoulders and back aching from carrying heavy 5-gallon buckets of paint up and down ladders. When I came home at the end of a grueling shift, all I ever wanted was a hot shower and a quiet, warm place to close my eyes. But my family made absolutely sure I never felt at home. The contrast between my harsh reality and Gemma's pampered existence was genuinely sickening. She was the golden child, the perfect, beautiful daughter who could do no wrong. I was the invisible daughter, the permanent scapegoat. Whenever anything went wrong in their lives, it was somehow my fault. The narrative my parents spun to their country club friends was that I was a struggling, mentally unstable, lazy artist who refused to get a real job, and that I should be eternally grateful they even allowed me to sleep under their luxurious roof. They made me feel like my very existence, the space I took up in the world, was a heavy burden on them. They normalized this daily cruelty so deeply and so consistently that I actually began to believe it. I believed that I deserved to be shivering in a damp basement while my sister hosted lavish, catered parties directly above my head. I genuinely thought my poverty and my exhaustion were my own fault. I had absolutely no idea that my misery was being carefully engineered by the very people sleeping under the same roof. How did I end up trapped in this psychological prison for so long without fighting back? You might naturally wonder why a grown woman of 31 years old would stay in a situation like that. Why not just pack a bag, walk out the front door, and never look back? The answer is unfortunately not that simple. When you are subjected to constant emotional manipulation and severe gaslighting from the day you are born, your entire sense of reality becomes warped. You lose your baseline for what love and family are actually supposed to look like. You become permanently trapped in a museum of your own pain, constantly walking the halls, reviewing the painful exhibits of your life, and wondering where you went so horribly wrong to deserve this treatment. Let me walk you through the primary exhibits of my personal museum of pain, because they explain exactly how the trap was set. Exhibit A was the transportation situation. Because my job required hauling tall ladders, heavy steel scaffolding, and dozens of gallons of paint across the county, I desperately needed a reliable vehicle. I saved every penny I could and bought a rusted, 10-year-old work truck. I paid for it completely by myself, taking on an exhausting extra commercial mural job at a local shopping mall just to afford the monthly payments and the expensive insurance. I was running on empty, pulling 14-hour shifts just to keep my head barely above water. The very week I proudly brought my beaten-up, noisy truck home and parked it near the back alley, my father Orson surprised Gemma in the massive circular driveway. He handed her the shiny keys to a brand-new, fully loaded Tesla Model X. She squealed loudly, jumping up and down and hugging him, performing the perfect reaction for the camera her assistant Piper was holding to film the whole thing for social media. I stood quietly by my truck, wiping dark grease off my hands with a rag, and calmly asked my father how he could afford such an extravagant luxury car when he always told me money was too tight to help me with my groceries. Orson barely even looked at me. He kept his eyes on Gemma. Gemma needs a highly reliable, aesthetically pleasing vehicle to maintain her personal brand, he stated flatly, his tone thick with condescension. She is building a massive wellness empire, Sloane. You just paint fake trees for amateur actors. Your rusty truck is perfectly fine for someone who is always covered in dirt and sweat. You should try being happy for your sister for once instead of being so bitterly jealous. Exhibit B was the specific incident that sealed my fate and locked me in the basement. 2 years ago, I was working late on a massive, complex set for a local theater production of a historical drama. The wooden scaffolding I was standing on had been poorly assembled by the stage crew, and it suddenly collapsed without warning. I fell 15 feet straight down onto the solid hardwood stage. I woke up hours later in the hospital emergency room with a severe concussion, 2 broken ribs, and a terribly fractured collarbone. I was in agonizing, blinding pain, drifting in and out of consciousness because of the heavy, intravenous painkillers the doctors were pumping into my system. My mother Daphne sat by my hospital bed. She did not gently stroke my hair. She did not hold my hand or tell me everything was going to be fine. Instead, she slid a thick stack of complex legal documents onto my plastic tray table, aggressively pressing a heavy pen into my uninjured left hand. She told me, her voice smooth and reassuring, that it was just standard hospital and insurance paperwork, absolutely necessary for the administration to process my emergency surgery and to handle my medical bills while I was incapacitated and recovering. I trusted her completely. My brain was incredibly foggy, my vision was spinning, and I just wanted the searing pain in my chest to stop. I signed my name exactly where she pointed, over and over again. I did not realize until much, much later that I had not signed insurance forms. I had signed a comprehensive, legally binding power of attorney. I had legally handed over total control of my finances, my medical decisions, and my legal rights to my parents, while I was practically unconscious. Exhibit C was the devastating aftermath of that signature. The medical bills piled up incredibly fast. Despite my mother claiming they were handling everything through my insurance, aggressive collection agencies started calling my phone day and night. The stress was eating me alive. I finally confronted Daphne about it in the kitchen one morning before work. She sighed dramatically, stirring her expensive, imported organic coffee with a silver spoon. "We simply do not have the liquid cash right now to pay these massive bills, Sloan," she said, not even looking up. "The generous maintenance fund your Grandma Beatrix used to send from Switzerland completely dried up months ago. The economy is tough for everyone. You're an adult, and you need to take responsibility for your own massive debts instead of expecting us to bail you out." So, I did exactly that. I went back to work with broken, healing ribs. Every movement was agony. I took on every grueling, underpaid painting job I could find. I ate cheap instant noodles and plain toast in my damp basement while I listened to the delivery drivers dropping off $200 gourmet meals for my family upstairs. I worked myself to the absolute bone to pay off a crushing $50,000 medical debt, genuinely believing that my grandmother had abandoned us and my parents were just doing their best in a tough situation. I swallowed the injustice daily, burying my anger deep down because I thought I had no other choice. How much more could they possibly take from me before there was nothing left? While I was drowning in a sea of medical debt and physical exhaustion, my sister Gemma was rapidly ascending to internet stardom. Gemma was a self-proclaimed holistic wellness coach. Her entire lucrative career was built entirely on selling a peaceful, enlightened lifestyle she did not actually earn or practice. She sold virtual meditation retreats, toxic positivity seminars, and hand-poured aesthetic candles for $200 apiece. Her online brand was all about healing energy, manifestation, and living your most authentic, luxurious life. She had accumulated around 500,000 followers across her various social media platforms. To them, she was a serene guru of peace, health, and prosperity. To me, she was a shallow monster wrapped in expensive beige linen. The $4 million coastal estate was her ultimate, most effective prop. She constantly filmed highly edited room tours of the vaulted ceilings, the imported stone fireplaces, and the massive infinity pool overlooking the crashing ocean waves. She boldly told her devoted followers that she bought the entire estate herself at the age of 26, claiming it was a direct physical manifestation of her incredibly hard work, her business savvy, and her high-frequency positive vibrations. Her assistant and chief flying monkey, a younger girl named Piper, was always following her around with a glowing ring light and a professional camera. Piper was essentially Gemma's lapdog, constantly validating Gemma's extreme delusions of grandeur and actively helping her bully anyone who stepped out of line. One humid Tuesday afternoon, I was walking slowly up the long, paved driveway after a brutal 12-hour shift. I saw an older delivery driver carrying a massive, incredibly heavy antique mirror toward the front porch. He was clearly struggling with the weight. His foot slipped off the stone path for just a second, and he accidentally stepped onto the pristine, manicured grass, leaving a very slight, barely noticeable mud print. Gemma and Piper were filming a yoga sequence on the porch. Gemma dropped her calm, zen persona instantly, like flipping a switch. She marched down the stone steps and started screaming aggressively at the older driver. Her face was bright red, her voice shrill and vicious. She called him incompetent, stupid, and a clumsy idiot, threatening loudly to call his corporate office and have him fired immediately for ruining her aesthetic landscaping. The poor man looked completely terrified and deeply embarrassed. He apologized repeatedly, his hands shaking, but Gemma demanded he take the heavy mirror back to his truck and get off her property instantly. I could not stand to watch it anymore. I dropped my heavy bags, walked over rapidly, and stepped directly between Gemma and the shaking driver. I told her firmly to back off and calm down. Gemma sneered at me, her eyes filled with disgust. She told me to mind my own pathetic business before storming back inside the house with Piper trailing behind her. I turned to the driver, apologizing profusely for my sister's horrific behavior. I reached into my paint-stained pocket and handed him a $40 tip, which was half of the cash I had to my name that day. He thanked me quietly, looking at my dirty work clothes with a mixture of immense gratitude and deep confusion. That was the true reality of the golden child. She was a hollow, deeply cruel person who fed on the misery of others to inflate her own fragile ego. She used over $700,000 of what I thought was her own business revenue to aggressively renovate the house, tearing out beautiful, historical original fixtures to install incredibly trendy, cheap-looking gold accents. She hosted massive, catered networking parties for local influencers every weekend, pretending to be some kind of modern royalty. The turning point, the moment that began the unraveling of her entire fake empire, happened purely by accident. It was a Tuesday, exactly 2 days before the infamous Thanksgiving dinner. Gemma had hosted a massive pre-holiday networking brunch for 50 people. The house and the grounds were an absolute mess. As usual, Orson and Daphne told me I needed to clear the massive piles of trash from the back patio immediately if I wanted to keep living in the basement rent-free. I was exhausted to my core, but I grabbed the heavy black trash bags and started hauling them one by one to the large disposal bins in the back alley. Gemma's pampered, poorly trained designer dog was actively digging through a smaller pile of loose refuse near the back kitchen door. As I stepped over to shoo the dog away from the mess, I noticed a thick, cream-colored envelope lying half-buried in the dirt. It had been torn roughly in half, likely by the dog's teeth. The paper was heavy, textured, and clearly very expensive. I recognized the embossed gold logo immediately. It was from a highly prestigious Swiss bank, the exact same financial institution my grandma Beatrix always used. I bent down and picked it up, brushing the dirt off the thick paper. My heart suddenly skipped a beat, then started hammering against my ribs when I read the name printed clearly on the front in crisp, black ink. It did not say Orson. It did not say Daphne. And it certainly did not say Gemma. The name printed there, followed by the address of the $4 million estate, was Sloane. Why on earth was my family secretly throwing away important banking letters addressed directly to me from Switzerland? That alarming discovery in the dirt brings us right back to the morning of Thanksgiving, the very day the glass finally shattered and the grand illusion began to violently crack. Before the catastrophic dinner, before the red wine stained my dress, there was a quiet, incredibly suffocating tension building steadily in the house all morning. Gemma was in an absolute frenzy of preparation. She had excitedly promised her hundreds of thousands of followers an exclusive, behind-the-scenes live stream of her luxurious holiday hosting routine. The entire estate had to look flawlessly perfect, like a magazine spread. I had spent the entire morning since 6 am scrubbing the hardwood floors on my hands and knees, polishing the massive marble countertops until my arms ached, and prepping the intricate vegetable platters. My mother Daphne hovered constantly over me, criticizing every single move I made. "Make sure you slice those organic carrots perfectly even, Sloane," she demanded, tapping her foot. "Gemma's aesthetic requires absolute precision. And try not to get your dirty fingerprints on the silver serving trays." I kept my head down, scrubbing silently, But my mind was racing a mile a minute, obsessively thinking about the torn Swiss envelope safely hidden under my mattress down in the dark basement. By late afternoon, the first wave of guests began to arrive. These were not our family members or old friends. They were local influencers, minor internet celebrities, and wealthy socialites that Gemma was desperately trying to impress to elevate her brand. I was explicitly told to stay out of sight in the basement, but after hours of cleaning, I desperately needed a glass of cold water. I slipped quietly into the kitchen, wearing the one nice, soft green dress I owned. It was a modest dress, bought from a second-hand shop, but it was clean and I felt genuinely pretty in it for once. As I poured water from the filtered tap, an older, distinguished gentleman walked into the kitchen looking for a napkin. He was a prominent local art dealer, someone Gemma had been aggressively trying to network with to secure a lucrative sponsorship deal for her brand. He saw me standing there and smiled kindly. Then he noticed a small, highly intricate sketch of a botanical fern I had accidentally left on the counter earlier that morning. He picked it up, adjusting his glasses and analyzing the shading details carefully. "This is truly remarkable work," he said, looking over at me with genuine respect. "The shading and the attention to botanical detail are incredibly precise. Did you draw this?" Before I could even open my mouth to answer him, Gemma practically stormed into the kitchen. Her bright, hosting smile instantly froze and dropped when she saw the important art dealer talking directly to me. Her eyes darted frantically from my sketch in his hands to my green dress, and I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated rage cross her perfectly made-up face. She absolutely hated it when the spotlight shifted away from her, even for a single second. She especially hated that someone important and wealthy was acknowledging my existence as a human being. "Oh, Arthur," Gemma laughed loudly, a sharp, grating sound as she stepped aggressively between us. "That is just some silly doodles my older sister does. She is a bit of a family charity case. We generously let her stay down in the basement so she can try to get her messy life together. Come back out to the main living room. I have a special artisanal charcuterie board I want to show you." Arthur looked very uncomfortable with her tone, but he politely nodded, placing my sketch face down on the counter and quietly leaving the room. The absolute second the heavy kitchen door swung shut behind him, Gemma dropped the fake smile completely. She walked slowly over to me, holding her large crystal glass of expensive red wine. "You think you are so incredibly clever, do you not?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Trying to secretly network with my VIP guests? Trying to pretend you are anything more than an absolute failure?" I looked her dead in the eye, refusing to shrink away this time. "I am just getting a glass of water, Gemma," I said calmly. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. "You do not belong up here. You are a massive embarrassment to this family." Then, maintaining eye contact with a casual, deliberate flick of her wrist, she tipped the glass forward. The dark red liquid splashed aggressively across my chest, soaking instantly into the light green fabric of my dress. The sudden cold shock of it made me gasp out loud. Daphne and Orson walked into the kitchen right at that exact moment. Daphne gasped loudly, not at the physical assault her younger daughter just committed, but at the small drops of wine hitting the floor. "Sloane, look what you have done," my mother shrieked, pointing a manicured finger. "You are dripping wine all over the imported Italian tile." I stared at them in disbelief but not surprised. "She threw it right at me," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the massive roaring sound in my ears. Orson marched forward, grabbing me roughly by the shoulder. His grip was tight and punishing. "Do not dare lie to us, Sloane. You are always causing unnecessary drama. You are incredibly clumsy and reckless. Now get down on your hands and knees and clean this mess up immediately before the rest of the guests see what a disaster you are." Gemma smiled smugly, setting her empty crystal glass down on the counter with a soft clink. "Make sure she uses the good chemical cleaner, Mom. We absolutely do not want a permanent stain on the marble." She turned gracefully on her heel and walked back out to her glamorous party, leaving me standing alone in a puddle of wine, surrounded by my parents' glaring disappointment. I did not cry. The tears would simply not come. Instead, a cold, incredibly hard resolve settled permanently into my chest. I grabbed the cleaning rag, wiped the floor in absolute silence, and walked back down to the basement. I locked the heavy metal door behind me with a loud click. I was completely done being their victim. What exactly was written on the papers inside that Swiss envelope? The basement felt darker and colder than usual when I finally locked the door, but my mind was burning with a terrifying, crystal-clear focus. I stripped off the ruined green dress, throwing the wine-soaked fabric into the far corner of the concrete room like a shed skin. I pulled on my thick, paint-stained work sweater and sat heavily on the edge of the sunken twin mattress. I reached under the mattress and pulled the torn Swiss envelope out from its hiding place. I had carefully taped the two ripped halves back together the night before. I slowly and methodically extracted the folded documents inside. They were slightly damp from being in the trash and blurred at the edges, but the dense, typed text was completely legible. It was a comprehensive annual financial summary from the International Trust Department of the bank. I stared at the pages, but the complex financial numbers and legal jargon made absolutely no sense to my exhausted, stressed brain. There were massive figures, hundreds of thousands of dollars, listed clearly under an account officially named the Sloan Coastal Trust. I desperately needed help. I needed someone intelligent who was not blinded by my family's toxic, manipulative fog. I looked at the digital clock on my phone. It was almost 2 a.m. The lavish party upstairs was finally winding down, leaving only the muffled sounds of heavy footsteps pacing on the hardwood floors above me. I grabbed my phone and dialed the only person in the world I truly trusted. Hayes. Hayes was the senior lighting technician at the large community theater where I worked. He was incredibly sharp, highly observant, and had always been deeply suspicious of the dark bruises on my arms from carrying heavy gear alone, and the permanent dark circles under my eyes. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Sloan? Is that you? Are you okay? Is something wrong?" I took a long, shaky breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "I really need you to help me look at something, Hayes," I whispered, afraid my parents would hear me through the vents. "I think my family has been lying to me. About absolutely everything." I took highly detailed, close-up photos of the documents and texted them securely to him. We stayed on the phone for over an hour while he meticulously analyzed the complex financial jargon on his computer screen. Hayes was completely quiet for a long time, the heavy silence stretching tight across the phone line. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was completely devoid of sleep. It was deadly serious. "Sloan, this is not just a standard bank statement. This is a highly detailed property tax notification." "What exactly does that mean?" I asked, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. "It means a massive tax payment was automatically deducted from a private trust fund in your exact name," he explained slowly, making sure I understood every word. "And the specific property that this tax payment is covering is located in Boca Raton, Florida. It is the exact address of the $4 million estate you are sitting inside right now. Sloan, your parents do not own that house. Gemma definitely does not own that house. You own it. You are the sole legal beneficiary of the entire trust." The concrete room started to spin violently. The damp, gray walls seemed to close in on me, crushing the air out of my lungs. "That is completely impossible," I whispered, pressing my hand to my forehead. "Gemma has been publicly claiming to millions of people that she bought it with her coaching business revenue. My parents act like they govern the entire place. I literally sleep in an unfinished basement. If I legally own it, how are they possibly getting away with doing this?" I heard Hayes typing furiously on his mechanical keyboard. "Give me a minute. Let me pull up the public county property records online. They are public access if you know where to look." I waited in silence, listening to the incredibly heavy thumping of my own heart echoing in my ears. The massive wall of gaslighting I had endured for years started to violently crack and peel away layer by layer. I was not crazy. I was not a worthless burden. I was being actively robbed blind. "Okay, I have the deed pulled up," Hayes said, his tone turning incredibly grim. The coastal estate was purchased exactly 3 years ago for $4 million in cash. The legal deed is securely in your name. But there is a very specific legal addendum filed with the county clerk's office. It is a full medical guardianship override, legally giving your father, Orson, total administrative control over the property and the associated trust funds. I felt physically sick. My stomach violently churned. The hospital. The terrifying scaffolding accident. The dense stack of papers my mother aggressively shoved in my face while I was high on intravenous painkillers. They did not just steal a beautiful house. They literally stole my autonomy as a human being. They maliciously weaponized my severe physical injury to legally enslave me in my own home. "You are not crazy, Sloane," Hayes said softly, validating the exact, terrifying thought forming in my head. "They are deeply manipulating you. They intentionally isolated you, completely convinced you that you were worthless and unstable, just so you would never, ever question the financial arrangement. They are not just awful, toxic people. They are literal criminals committing major fraud." I slowly looked up at the water-stained ceiling. Directly above me, I could hear Gemma's heavy, confident footsteps walking toward her massive master suite. The hot rage I felt earlier in the kitchen was absolutely nothing compared to the roaring, consuming inferno burning inside my chest right now. I was going to completely burn her fake, aesthetic empire to the ground. Just how deep did the financial theft really go? The rest of that long, sleepless night was an absolute blur of frantic, highly focused digital investigation. Hayes patiently guided me step by step through the complex process of accessing the secure county portal and setting up verified accounts to pull every single piece of public and private data linked to my social security number. With the fraudulent power of attorney Orson held, he had essentially built a massive, administrative fortress around my financial identity, but Hayes was brilliant with data retrieval and bypass methods. As the sun slowly began to rise, painting the tiny sliver of space under the heavy basement door a pale, ghostly gray, the full, horrifying picture finally came into crystal clear focus. The actual numbers we uncovered were absolutely staggering. When my grandma Beatrix purchased the estate, she did not just buy the physical property. She had established a massive, heavily funded maintenance account designed specifically to help me convert the massive, detached 3-car garage into a professional, commercial-grade scenic painting studio. She had deposited exactly $800,000 in cash directly into that account for my future. My parents had systematically drained every single penny of it. They used my forged signature from that hospital bed to authorize dozens of massive wire transfers over 3 years. That money did not go toward my art studio. It went directly toward Gemma's incredibly vain, unnecessary vanity renovations. They tore out beautiful, custom hardwood floors just to put in cheap, trendy white tiles. They spent over $100,000 building a massive infinity pool solely so Gemma could take photos in her expensive designer bikinis. They bought her the $100,000 Tesla in cash. They completely funded her fake, hollow wellness coaching business, paying for her expensive online advertising campaigns, her massive inventory of overpriced, imported candles, and her assistant Piper's inflated salary. Every single luxurious aspect of Gemma's supposedly enlightened, successful life was paid for entirely by the money meant to secure my future. The irony of the situation was so incredibly bitter I could physically taste it in the back of my throat. Gemma, the woman who constantly told her followers to manifest their own wealth through positive energy and hard work, was nothing but a lazy parasite feeding directly off her traumatized, overworked older sister. Her entire success story was literally my stolen life. I sat back heavily on the sunken mattress, staring blankly at the glowing screen of my battered laptop. I had successfully downloaded every single bank statement, every forged signature document, and a certified copy of the original deed to the house. I had absolutely everything I needed to destroy them. But I knew that simply walking upstairs and confronting my parents would not work at all. They would vehemently deny it. They would maliciously twist the narrative to make me look crazy. Orson would instantly use the fraudulent power of attorney to claim I was mentally unstable and have me institutionalized to silence me. I needed a flawless strategy that would strip them of their stolen power instantly, undeniably, and very publicly. I needed to utterly destroy their grand illusion where it mattered the most to them. I needed to do it live, in front of her massive online audience. I spent the next intense hour carefully setting up a screen recording software on my phone to capture everything. I meticulously organized all the downloaded financial documents into a highly secure, encrypted cloud folder that they could not delete. I rehearsed exactly what I was going to say in my head over and over again. My heart was pounding relentlessly against my ribs, a chaotic mixture of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated terror. I was about to completely blow up my entire family. I was about to cross a massive, definitive line from which there was absolutely no return. But as I looked around the miserable, damp basement they had forced me to call home for 3 years, I knew there was no other choice left. Just as I finalized the backup upload of the evidence, my phone suddenly buzzed violently with an urgent alert from the exterior security cameras. I still had basic access to the home Wi-Fi network, and the notification popped up brightly on my screen. Motion detected at the main front gate. I quickly clicked the notification to view the live feed. The camera showed a sleek, black luxury sedan with official diplomatic license plates pulling to a smooth stop at the end of the incredibly long, paved driveway. The driver stepped out briskly, walking around to open the heavy rear door. A woman stepped out, leaning heavily on a polished, antique ebony cane. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored coat, exuding an aura of absolute, undeniable authority. My breath caught sharply in my throat. It was Grandma Beatrix. She lived full-time in Switzerland. She hated flying with a passion. She never, ever visited the States without months of careful planning and notification. But here she was, standing silently outside the tall iron gates of my stolen house, completely unannounced and looking incredibly severe. The pieces on the board were moving much faster than I ever anticipated. The trap was fully set. The final game was about to begin, and the devastating climax of this family drama was going to be broadcast live to the world. But what happened next went far beyond even my wildest, most vindictive plans. If you are enjoying this story of ultimate family revenge and want to hear exactly how the trap was sprung, please drop a comment saying, "I'm Win." This is the secret code for all my true listeners who have stayed with me this far. I will be reading the comments, dropping a heart, and replying to everyone who uses that code. The confrontation is about to get explosive, and you do not want to miss the fallout. What will Grandma Beatrix do when she sees the truth? I sat completely frozen on the edge of my sunken basement mattress, my eyes glued to the glowing screen of my phone. The live security feed from the front gate showed Grandma Beatrix stepping out of the sleek black sedan. She stood there for a moment, leaning heavily on her polished ebony cane, her sharp eyes scanning the imposing iron gates of the $4 million coastal estate. She looked incredibly severe, dressed in a tailored wool coat that probably cost more than my parents made in a year. Beatrix was a formidable woman, a self-made real estate titan who lived full-time in Switzerland. She despised flying, hated the unpredictability of travel, and never, ever showed up anywhere without months of careful planning and strict itineraries. Yet, here she was, standing on the driveway of the house she had secretly purchased for me, completely unannounced. I watched as her driver reached forward and pressed the call button on the security intercom. Up in the main house, the loud, echoing chime of the doorbell rang out. It was a sharp, piercing sound that cut right through the lingering morning tension. I could hear the immediate scuffling of feet directly above me. My mother Daphne was barking orders at someone, probably Gemma or Piper, telling them to clear away the leftover charcuterie boards from the previous night before whoever was at the door could see the mess. I quickly unlocked the heavy metal door of the basement and cracked it open just an inch, pressing my ear against the cold steel frame. I had to hear this. I had to know exactly how the illusion would begin to fracture. Upstairs, I heard the heavy oak front door swing open. There was a pause, a moment of absolute, dead silence that felt like it stretched on for an eternity. Then I heard the sharp, unmistakable sound of a ceramic coffee cup slipping from someone's grasp and shattering violently against the imported Italian tile. It was my father, Orson. Mother, Orson stammered, his voice cracking and devoid of its usual arrogant boom. We did not. We had no idea you were coming to the States. We thought you were still in Zurich for the winter. Grandma Beatrix did not respond immediately. I could hear the slow, rhythmic tapping of her ebony cane against the hardwood floor as she stepped past him and walked into the grand foyer. She was not a woman who engaged in pleasantries when she was on a mission. I imagined her sharp, calculating eyes scanning the massive living room. She was looking at the cheap, trendy gold accents Gemma had installed. She was looking at the massive ring lights, the pastel yoga mats scattered across the floor, and the incredibly tacky, overpriced manifestation candles lined up along the custom stone fireplace. What in the absolute world is this? Beatrix finally spoke, her voice cold, crisp, and cutting through the air like a serrated knife. It did not sound like a question. It sounded like an indictment. Daphne's voice chimed in, trembling with panic. Beatrix, what a wonderful surprise. We are just redecorating. Gemma is hosting a few wellness seminars here, and we wanted the space to feel inviting and modern. Inviting and modern? Beatrix repeated, the disdain dripping from every syllable. I did not wire $800,000 in cash to a maintenance fund so you could turn this historic property into a cheap-smelling spa. I came here specifically to see the massive, detached garage. I came to see Sloane's commercial art studio. I wanted to see where my investment was going. Why does this entire house smell like cheap, synthetic vanilla candles? And more importantly, where is Sloane? The silence that followed was suffocating. I could practically feel the sheer terror radiating from my parents through the floorboards. They were trapped. The ghost they thought they had buried in the basement with their lies was suddenly being summoned by the one person holding the purse strings to their entire fake reality. I held my breath, waiting for their response. What elaborate lie would they spin this time? The panic upstairs was palpable. You could almost smell the fear mixing with Gemma's cheap vanilla candles. When Grandma Beatrix demanded to see me, to see the art studio that did not exist, my parents immediately shifted into their practiced, defensive survival mode. They had spent 3 years perfecting the art of gaslighting, and they were not going to give up their luxurious lifestyle without a vicious fight. Daphne was the first to speak, her voice dropping an octave, putting on her absolute best performance of a tragic, long-suffering mother. Oh, Beatrix, Daphne sighed heavily, the fake tears practically audible in her tone. We really did not want to burden you with this over in Switzerland. We wanted to protect you from the heartbreak. Sloane is not doing well at all. What do you mean she is not doing well? Beatrix demanded, the tapping of her cane stopping abruptly. Orson chimed in, stepping closer to his mother, his voice thick with manufactured grief. She had a massive mental breakdown after her scaffolding accident, Mother. The doctors prescribed her heavy painkillers, and she spiraled completely out of control. She developed a severe addiction. We had to use the maintenance fund you sent to pay for multiple stints in a high-end, private rehabilitation facility. She is highly unstable, Beatrix. We have her staying down in the basement right now because it is the only safe place we can keep her contained. She is dangerous. I stood at the bottom of the basement stairs, my hands clenched into tight fists, my fingernails digging so hard into my palms that they drew tiny drops of blood. They were doing it again. They were effortlessly painting me as a monster to the only woman who ever actually tried to help me. They were using my legitimate trauma, the very injury they exploited to steal my identity, as the perfect cover story for their massive financial crimes. Gemma, never one to miss an opportunity for the spotlight, rushed forward. It is true, Grandma, she said, her voice trembling perfectly. It has been an absolute nightmare for our family. She screams at us in the middle of the night. She constantly demands money for drugs. We were just trying to get her to calm down this morning because she threatened to ruin my business event. There was a heavy pause. I need to see her, Beatrix said firmly. I do not care what state she is in. Take me down to the basement immediately. No, Orson practically shouted, his panic breaking through the facade. No, Mother, it is not safe. She is highly aggressive right now. Let me go down there first and make sure she is decent. Please, just sit in the living room and let Daphne make you some tea. I heard Orson's heavy footsteps rushing across the floorboards directly toward the hidden pantry door. I quickly stepped back, retreating quietly into the darkest corner of the basement, near the grinding water pump. The heavy metal door swung open, and Orson marched down the wooden stairs. His face was bright red, the veins in his neck bulging with absolute fury. He did not say a word. He walked straight up to me, grabbed me by the collar of my thick work sweater, and slammed me hard against the rough concrete wall. The impact knocked the wind completely out of my lungs. "You listen to me, you pathetic little failure," Orson hissed, his breath smelling like stale coffee and pure desperation. "Your grandmother is upstairs. If you make a single sound, if you try to walk up those stairs and ruin this for your sister, I swear to God I will call the police right now. I hold your medical power of attorney. I will tell them you are having a violent psychotic break, and I will have you locked inside a state psychiatric ward so fast your head will spin. Do you understand me? You stay down here in the dark where you belong." He squeezed my collar tighter, cutting off my air for a terrifying second, before shoving me away. He turned on his heel and marched back up the stairs, slamming the heavy metal door shut behind him and locking the deadbolt from the outside. I stood in the dim, flickering fluorescent light, rubbing my bruised collarbone. I was locked in. My own father had just physically assaulted me and threatened to institutionalize me simply to protect a lie. He thought that by turning the lock, he had won. He thought he had silenced me forever. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. The basement door had a secondary deadbolt on the inside, but the hinges were exposed. More importantly, I was a scenic painter who spent 12 hours a day working with heavy tools. I walked over to my metal toolbox, pulled out a heavy steel crowbar, and looked up at the ceiling. The desperate cover-up was falling apart, and I was going to be the sledgehammer that smashed it to pieces. What happens when the scapegoat decides to stop running? I wedged the flat edge of the heavy steel crowbar right into the gap between the lock and the door frame. I did not care about being quiet anymore. I put my entire body weight into it, using the raw strength I had built from years of hauling scaffolding. The cheap metal casing of the deadbolt Orson had just locked gave way with a loud, violent crack that echoed up the stairwell. The door swung open freely. I dropped the crowbar on the concrete floor. I did not bother changing my clothes. I was wearing my paint-stained work jeans and a faded, oversized sweater. I wanted Grandma Beatrix to see exactly what I looked like. I wanted her to see the glaring, undeniable contrast between my reality and Gemma's fake luxury. But before I walked up those wooden stairs, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I had been preparing for this moment all night with Hayes. The evidence was secured. But presenting a stack of papers to my parents would only lead to more lies, more gaslighting, and more screaming. I needed witnesses. I needed an audience so massive and so public that Orson and Daphne could never, ever spin the narrative again. I opened the Instagram app. I knew for a fact that Gemma's notification alerts were on. She lived absolutely for the dopamine hit of a like or a comment. I also knew that her hundreds of thousands of followers were currently refreshing their feeds constantly, eagerly waiting for the exclusive holiday hosting house tour she had promised them all week. I swiped over to the camera feature, turned the lens to face outward, and typed in a caption that I knew would instantly trigger the algorithm. The caption read, "The absolute truth about the $4 million coastal estate. Behind the scenes of a fraud." I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over the screen. Then I hit the button to go live. I instantly tagged Gemma's main account, pinning the notification right to the top of her follower feed. The viewer count started to tick up immediately. 10 viewers. 50 viewers. 200 viewers. I did not wait. I held the phone up steady, ensuring the camera captured a wide angle of the hallway, and I walked up the stairs, stepping right out of the hidden pantry door and straight into the massive, sunlit living room. The scene I walked into was a total masterclass in deception. Gemma was currently sitting on the velvet sofa, holding Grandma Beatrix's hand, looking up at her with large, dewy, innocent eyes, clearly spinning another horrific lie about my supposed drug addiction. My mother Daphne was nodding along sadly, playing the role of the long-suffering, resilient saint. Orson was standing by the fireplace, looking incredibly nervous, but trying to project authority. It was a lie so beautifully polished it practically gleamed in the sunlight. "Grandma," I said loudly, my voice cutting through their pathetic performance like a heavy serrated knife. The reaction was instantaneous. Orson's head whipped around, his face draining of all color. Daphne let out a sharp gasp. But Gemma was the one who reacted the most violently. Her head snapped up, and her eyes locked directly onto the glowing phone in my hand. For the very first time in her pampered, entitled life, I saw genuine, unadulterated terror wash over her features. She recognized the interface. She knew exactly what I was doing. She knew that the little red number in the corner of my screen was rapidly ticking up past 1,000, then 5,000, then 10,000 viewers. She knew that her carefully curated brand, her lifestyle, and her entire existence were about to be brutally exposed as a complete fraud. "Sloan, put that phone away right now," Gemma hissed, her voice dropping a full octave, the sweet influencer sparkle vanishing into thin air. "Grandma does not like being filmed. Turn it off." "I think Grandma is going to like this very much," I replied calmly, stepping closer and keeping the camera perfectly steady. I turned the lens slightly so it captured the entire room, the vaulted ceilings, the ridiculous infinity pool outside, and finally, the terrified, pale faces of my parents. Grandma Beatrix frowned deeply, looking from the glowing phone to me, taking in my dirty work clothes and the dark circles under my eyes. She sensed the massive shift in the room's gravity. "What is the meaning of this, Sloan? Why are you filming?" I stepped right into the center of the room. "Grandma, I have a very simple question for you, and I want you to answer it clearly while 100,000 people are currently watching this live stream." Daphne lunged forward. "Sloan, stop this madness. You are having an episode." "Stay exactly where you are," Daphne, Beatrix commanded, raising her ebony cane just an inch off the floor. The authority in her voice froze my mother in her tracks. Beatrix looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "Ask your question, Sloan." I held the phone steady, framing Beatrix and Gemma in the shot. "I want you to tell everyone watching right now exactly whose house this is," I said, projecting my voice clearly. "Because Gemma here has been telling the entire internet, her sponsors, and all our local family friends that she bought this estate with her own money. She claims she earned it. But I seem to remember finding a torn property tax document in the trash yesterday that suggested otherwise." The air completely left the room. It was as if a vacuum had been turned on. Orson made a small, strangled, pathetic noise in the back of his throat. Gemma stood up, her hands visibly shaking, tears of sheer panic welling in her eyes. "Please do not do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Sloan, please, we can talk about this offline." "We are completely done talking offline," I said coldly. "Grandma?" Beatrix looked slowly at Gemma. She looked around at the expensive, ruined renovations, the cheap furniture that did not belong, the sheer, blinding entitlement that radiated off my sister like physical heat. Then she looked back at me, really looked at me, and the horrible realization finally hit her. The intricate lies about rehab, the missing, intercepted letters, the fake stories about drug addiction. It all clicked violently into place, and her expression hardened into pure diamond. "This coastal estate," Grandma Beatrix said, her voice projecting with absolute, devastating clarity into the microphone, "belongs solely and entirely to Sloan. I purchased it for her in cash 3 years ago. And if anyone else in this room is claiming ownership to the public, they are nothing but a thief." I turned the camera back to Gemma. Her face was ashen, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish out of water. The comments on the live stream screen were scrolling so incredibly fast they were just a massive blur of white text. Shock. Horrified questions. Angry accusations from her own followers and sponsors demanding to know why she lied. "You heard her," I said to the camera, and then I looked dead into my sister's terrified eyes. "Get out of my house." But before Gemma could even formulate a response, the heavy doorbell rang out again, cutting sharply through the thick, suffocating silence of the living room. Who was at the door this time? The ringing of the doorbell did not sound like the polite, cheerful chime of another arriving guest. It sounded like a sharp, insistent demand for entry. The timing was so incredibly perfect that it felt scripted, but I knew it was the reality of Grandma Beatrix's ruthless efficiency. Gemma sat completely frozen on the edge of the velvet sofa, staring wildly between Grandma Beatrix, the glowing screen of my phone, and the heavy oak front door. Her public downfall was actively streaming live to over 120,000 people, and there was absolutely nowhere left for her to run. My mother Daphne looked like she was genuinely about to pass out, swaying slightly on her feet. My father Orson was purple with a terrifying mixture of rage and panic, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "I will get that," I said calmly, never once dropping the angle of the camera. I walked backward toward the foyer, keeping my family perfectly framed in the shot, and reached out to pull the heavy oak door open. Standing on the porch was not a wealthy influencer or a lost delivery driver. It was Mr. Knox, Grandma Beatrix's personal legal counsel and senior financial auditor. He was a tall, imposing man in a sharp charcoal suit, holding a thick leather briefcase. Flanking him on either side were two uniformed police officers from the local precinct, looking incredibly serious. "We have a warrant," Mr. Knox said, his voice flat and completely devoid of emotion as he stepped smoothly past me and into the grand foyer. Gemma let out a high-pitched, terrifying squeak. "What warrant? What are you talking about?" Mr. Knox ignored her entirely. He walked straight into the living room, placed his leather briefcase on the marble coffee table, and clicked the brass locks open. He pulled out a thick stack of heavily documented files and a copy of the deed Gemma had so proudly flaunted on her social media for years. "This document," Mr. Knox announced, holding up the deed, "is a complete forgery. It is high quality, certainly, but structurally fake." "That is a lie," Orson protested loudly, stepping forward, his face slick with nervous sweat. "You cannot just barge in here and make wild accusations. I hold the legal medical power of attorney for Sloan. I am the administrator of this property." Mr. Knox turned slowly to face my father, adjusting his glasses. "Yes, the power of attorney. We pulled the original medical files from the hospital this morning after Beatrix received a very concerning phone call from Sloane's friend, Hayes. You see, Orson, using a power of attorney obtained under heavy medical duress to systematically drain $800,000 from a private trust fund is not administration. It is federal wire fraud." The silence that fell over the room this time was absolute. The word federal hung in the air like a heavy executioner's blade. They had panicked. They had fabricated evidence. They had treated me like a slave, and they had spectacularly failed. Mr. Knox then produced a stack of unopened, official-looking letters. "My stolen mail." He dropped them heavily onto the table. "Intercepting federal mail is a felony offense," he added flatly, looking directly at Daphne. One of the police officers stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his utility belt. "Gemma Hansen," the officer said, his voice echoing loudly in the vaulted room. "You are officially under arrest for aggravated identity theft, multiple counts of forgery, and grand larceny." Gemma tried to run. It was a pathetic, reflexive movement. She did not even make it 3 steps toward the back patio doors before the second officer grabbed her arm firmly, twisting it behind her back and clicking the cold steel cuffs shut around her delicate wrists. As the metal locked, she absolutely lost her mind. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, crying hysterically, completely ruining her expensive makeup. She violently blamed Orson. She blamed Daphne. She confessed to the forged renovations, shouting that they made her do it, that it was their idea to drain the account. And the live stream kept running. I kept the camera perfectly steady. 150,000 people actively watched the untouchable golden child fall spectacularly from grace in high definition. "Smile, Gemma," I said softly as the officers began to drag her toward the front door. "You are finally trending for something real. What happens when the ego finally dies?" As Gemma was forcefully dragged out of the front door, screaming obscenities and crying out for her followers to somehow save her, the sheer gravity of the situation finally crushed Orson and Daphne. They collapsed onto the velvet sofa, completely defeated, surrounded by the physical evidence of their massive financial crimes. I ended the live stream right then, leaving the internet with an explosive cliffhanger they would discuss for months. I did not say another word to my parents. I simply packed a small bag, walked out the front door with Grandma Beatrix and Mr. Knox, and checked into a quiet hotel downtown. I needed to breathe clean air for the first time in 3 years. But the family drama was not quite over yet. The final, spectacular explosion of the golden child's ego happened 2 days later. Daphne and Orson, desperate to maintain some semblance of control, managed to scrape together the last remaining limits on their credit cards to post Gemma's exorbitant bail. She was released from holding pending her massive federal trial. But the Gemma that walked out of that precinct was not the same arrogant influencer who had thrown wine at me. She was a woman who had lost absolutely everything. Her social media accounts were suspended due to mass reporting for fraud. Her lucrative sponsorships were canceled instantly. The internet had completely turned against her, mocking her downfall in thousands of viral videos. She was entirely bankrupt, both financially and morally. That night, a massive storm rolled in off the coast, bringing heavy rain and howling winds. Around midnight, the security system at the coastal estate mysteriously went offline. The next morning, I received a frantic phone call from the local police department asking me to come down to the property immediately. When I arrived, the scene was absolutely devastating, yet oddly poetic. Gemma had broken onto the property in the dead of night. She was completely unhinged, acting in a blind, destructive rage. She had taken Orson's heavy steel golf clubs from the garage and systematically destroyed everything she had falsely claimed as her own. The massive, expensive custom windows overlooking the infinity pool were completely smashed to jagged pieces. The cheap, trendy white tile floors she had installed were chipped and ruined. The velvet furniture was slashed to ribbons, the stuffing blown everywhere by the coastal wind. Most heartbreakingly, she had taken a club to the beautiful, newly framed glass greenhouse in the back, the exact spot where I had planned to build my scenic painting studio. It was shattered into a million tiny, glittering pieces across the wet grass. The police officers found her sitting in the middle of the ruined living room at dawn, soaking wet, her hands bleeding, staring blankly at the destruction. When the police approached her, she did not fight back. She just mumbled about how the aesthetic was ruined anyway. The police saw a textbook case of felony vandalism and criminal trespassing. But looking at the wreckage of the $4 million estate, I saw something much deeper. I saw the absolute, undeniable collapse of a human being. Without the stolen house, without the fake wealth and the adoring online audience, Gemma had literally no identity left. She did not know who she was if she was not better than me. Destroying the house was not just an act of revenge, it was the violent funeral of her massive, fragile ego. She was arrested again right there on the ruined floor. Because she had committed a severe violent felony while already out on bail for federal financial crimes, the judge showed zero leniency. This time, there was absolutely no bail granted. Gemma was remanded directly to the county jail to await her trial in a concrete cell. The investigation rapidly widened over the next few weeks. Mr. Knox handed everything over to the authorities. Orson and Daphne were publicly exposed for years of systematic financial fraud. Their precious reputation at the local country club collapsed overnight. They were permanently excommunicated from their wealthy social circles, left entirely alone with a mountain of crippling legal bills and profound public shame. They had bet their entire lives on the golden child, and she had dragged them down into the dirt with her. How does one even begin to rebuild after such absolute destruction? It took exactly 6 months to clear the wreckage and finally restore the estate to its true glory. The irony of the funding was deeply satisfying. Because Gemma had legally forged the deed and committed grand larceny, under the law, she was classified as a bad faith improver. That meant every single improvement she made, and every asset she purchased with my stolen money, legally belonged to me without any required compensation. We completely liquidated her entire fake empire. We sold the $100,000 Tesla. We auctioned off her massive collection of designer handbags, her expensive jewelry, and all the imported furniture that had survived her tantrum. The proceeds from selling her vanity were more than enough to completely repair the broken windows, rip out the cheap white tiles, and restore the beautiful, historic hardwood floors beneath them. Today, the house feels entirely different. The oppressive, suffocating energy is completely gone. Grandma Beatrix is sitting out on the restored wooden deck, drinking her tea and watching the peaceful waves of the ocean crash against the shore. Hayes is inside the living room, helping me measure the massive vaulted walls for a custom mural I am painting. And out in the back, the glass greenhouse has been beautifully rebuilt, fully converted into a sunlit, professional scenic painting studio where I can finally create my art in peace. Gemma is currently serving a 5-year sentence in a federal correctional facility. She caught a massive mansion to feel important and loved by strangers, but now she only has a tiny, shared concrete cell. I spent 3 years living in a dark, freezing basement, so I know exactly how to appreciate the warmth of the real sunlight. Orson and Daphne were forced to declare total bankruptcy. They lost their own home to the bank to pay for their criminal defense lawyers and are currently renting a tiny, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city, working minimum wage jobs just to survive. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means you have to burn the toxic bridge completely to the ground. If your family consistently profits from your deep pain, you have to count the horrible cost and stop paying it. Sometimes, sheer survival means changing the heavy locks, calling a ruthless lawyer, and finally letting awful people face the devastating, inevitable consequences of their own incredibly selfish choices. I do have one final question for all of you watching and reading this. Just last night, I received a pathetic, pleading text message from a prepaid burner phone. It was my mother, Daphne. She was crying, begging me to please send her some money to help pay off a $50,000 credit card debt so the bank would not repossess the only beaten-up used car they have left to get to work. So, I turn to you, my audience, as the final jury. What do you think I should do? Should I instantly block the number and never look back? Or should I go to the bank, get a certified check, and mail her exactly $4, the exact amount of money they left in my bank account while I was starving in the basement? Let me know exactly what you would do down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this incredible story. If you have not already, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another crazy family drama. See you in the next video.